Je suis vivant. On est tombé sur un truc qui nous dépasse.
This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. And what I'm looking at today is 2023's The Deep Dark, directed by Mathieu Turi. I really wanted to find this movie, and I was going through various means to do so, and recently it turned up on Tubi, which had me really jazzed. If you're not familiar with this movie at all, it revolves around a bunch of miners who, while mining, discover this creature, and of course chaos ensues. This is a French film, and that's also another reason I was interested in seeing it. The whole French aesthetic towards horror is different than the American aesthetic, though it oftentimes is patterned on the American aesthetic. It tends to be more visceral, it tends to be more out there, like High Tension, Frontiers, Martyrs, things of that nature. And so, as I said, I was really jazzed to see this movie. And having seen it, it's fine. It's not great, but it's fine. Though the reasons it doesn't quite resonate for me, I think, are interesting. The story revolves around these miners, some from foreign places like Morocco, others are French, and they just do their thing, which is mine. And one day a professor comes and pays them, quite handsomely apparently, to accompany them when they go to the mine, with the idea of researching something. They don't know quite what he's doing, all they know is that it pays well. And so they go about it. This bunch of miners has an immigrant from Morocco named Amir, and we see the movie through his eyes to some extent, but though that's one of the bigger problems with The Deep Dark for me. Amir, as a proxy for the audience, doesn't work particularly well. He's an interesting character. In fact, all the characters are interesting because they're very well acted, more so than the script giving them anything to do. And so the characters work, despite not knowing much about them. For instance, there's a character named Luis, and he is an asshole, but he's a well-acted asshole. So he appears to have more dimension than he really does. There's not a lot to the character, but the acting carries it. In any case, as I said, as an audience proxy, Amir doesn't work. And it's very odd to me that the movie is not centered around the professor, because as it goes on, we come to see that he's in search of something that is not only terrible, but his motivations for doing so aren't very good. And there are numerous instances in the movie where, now keep in mind, they're in a mine, where he just wanders off. And there's an instance where he betrays some of the miners. He has a good reason to do it, by the way. It makes sense in the context of the movie. But still, he's not to be trusted. But the professor is not the center of things. And once again, that's a pity. If I were to remake this movie, I would have it all revolve around the professor. It would start with the professor giving more information about why he's doing what he's doing and carry us through to where he enters the mine. That's where the real movie lies. Another curious thing about this movie is that no one sweats. Well, there's very little sweat. Now, you might think that's a relatively minor detail, and on one level it is. But you can't tell the temperature in the mines. I assume it's fairly hot because there's an earlier scene where you have a character without a shirt working. So it's probably quite warm. But no one really sweats in the movie. They're running around doing all sorts of physical activity in, once again, a place I assume is fairly warm, yet no one sweats. Another thing is that the creature is fairly interesting, but it's weird in the sense that it's not only over-designed, it's under-designed at the same time. It's really strange. It's a very alien-esque type creature physically, its body, but its head is just so over-designed. There's so much going on with the face of this monster. So many little details. And in my research, yeah, whatever. In looking into this movie further, I learned that it was designed by a Japanese designer, which kind of makes sense to me. It looks almost origami-like, the way it moves and so on. But once again, it's too much while being too little at the same time. And it's not really scary, it's just overly complicated, particularly the head, once again. There's just so much going on. I think the movie would have fared a lot better if the face of the creature were simpler. If it had the slightest ability to emote. The only way you can tell what this creature is going to do is based upon its actions. And it's fairly murderous. But if its face gave some type of emotion, it would have been, I think, a scarier film. It is a very dark movie, but the cinematography is really good. So you're not wallowing in the dark for any length of time, really, unless it's deliberately done. It is well lit, it is very well acted, and it is well directed. But the screenplay, also by Mathieu Turi, kind of lets you down. One of the best mind-based horror films that I can recall is 2013's Beneath. And it's really good, really tense, very similar to this, but it works better. And part of the reason Beneath works better is that the way it's shot. Beneath is very sharp in terms of sharpness and focus, and people's expressions and so on and so forth are rendered really harshly at points, but it works in the context of the movie. While The Deep Dark is very soft. The images aren't nearly as sharp as they could be. And once again, it's distracting. It's too soft for what the movie is. It needed to be sharper. It needed to be edgier in terms of the camera work. It needed to be harder. And speaking of said camera work, it's not bad, but it's not terribly interesting either. There are not any interesting angles. There's not any interesting perspectives that I can recall, but it's shot in a way that doesn't benefit the material. What I thought was particularly clever, though, is that it is a Lovecraftian movie and it makes reference to Lovecraft. And I enjoy that, particularly in movies like this, because it annoys me so much when you have a movie when it isn't based on a Lovecraft story. I wish they'd stop doing it. But in the case of The Deep Dark, they reference Strange Eons by Robert Bloch, a book I've read. It's really good. In any case, they quote a line from his book in this movie, and that's awesome. This is the kind of Lovecraftian I like, which is to say, things happen and someone references Lovecraft because within the context of the story it makes sense. Overall, The Deep Dark is pretty good. Its biggest sin, by my reckoning though, is not as good as it could be. It's not as scary as it could be. It's not as gory as it could be. There are some gory moments though, to be sure. This monster loves ripping off heads and spilling innards when it gets the chance. But it's just not very scary. It's almost feels like a documentary. And in terms of its production design, that makes a lot of sense. I've never been in a mine. I've been to France, but never in a mine anywhere. Never mind France. But it's done very well. Its sense of milieu, its sense of place feels very accurate. But it doesn't sweat other details, pardon the pun. The Deep Dark is currently on Tubi, and it's worth seeing. It is an interesting film. It's a well-done film. It's a well-shot film. But if you want a really creepy story revolving around mines and mining, which is not the same as caving, by the way. They're very close in terms of genre in the sense that they both take place underground. But caving is another matter entirely. And to my mind, the difference is mainly that caving is a natural process. Caves exist. They happen by erosion and all sorts of things. And you introduce people into them. Mining is an artificial process. It's people drilling holes and going under the earth. So therefore, the nature of the space itself has changed. For instance, in mining films, there are typically no stalactites, no stalagmites, no creatures that would be native to a cave, because it's not the environment. There are different subgenres, though related. If you're a hardcore horror fan, there's things to like about the Deep Dark. It's not going to be great for you, but there are things to like. Interestingly enough, if you're into history and authenticity, you will like the Deep Dark. It feels very authentic to the time period. I could be wrong on that, but I think it takes place in the early 1900s. And it feels very authentic. Overall, though, it's fine. It's not great. It's not terribly scary. The creature is overdone design-wise while being at the same time under-designed. It's a study of contrasts in a sense, but that doesn't mean it's not worth seeing. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Trailer to Reaction. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like, follow, or buy me a coffee.